Have you ever changed your opinion about React and its state management? Um, I have a lot. I initially thought that Redux was an overkill. Even the Redux author said that if you don't know if you need Redux, then most probably you don't need Redux. So let's discuss state management and React. So there are two types of state management. One is client and another is server. So let's talk about the client first. Let's say we have a component where we are storing some data, and then there is a child component needs to see this, show this data, and there is another child component needs to update this. So there's standard reason why you need some state management in client, right? And to demonstrate this, let's take an example you might have never seen before. So let's create a counter app. So I have a counter app ready. What we need to what we need to do is we have a parent component, and there is a child component which shows the count. There's another child component which is dependent on this count, and it shows the double value of count, and there is a button which increases this count, right? So let's see the code. I have a next application ready. Don't worry about next, I mean it's just React, just easier to maintain. So there's a page, and we are using use date to maintain the count. There is a set count property, and there are three child components. In the count, we are passing the count property, and it shows the count. In the double, we are again passing the count property, and there is another double state, and as soon as the count changes, the double's value is changing. And the set count property we are sending into increment function, increment component, and one click of button it increments that count, right? Simple. So let's see how this works. So let's say if I increment the count by 10, you see the parent component is rendered 11 times, the count component is rendered 11 times, the double component is rendered 21 times, and the button 11 times. Now these two components actually doesn't change anything, still they are rendered every time the count changes, right? And the double component is rendered 20 times because it will render first time when count changes, and since there is a property double here, when we change the value of double, it again re-renders. So for 20 count, the double component is rendered 21 times. Right, so there are a couple of issues with using standard React state management. The first one is, of course, looks ugly. We need to send too many properties down. Currently it is just one level, but it might increase, right? So this is called prop dealing. It can be ugly. Another thing is the logic is setting right into the view, basically the component, right? How we need to use double, it's sitting right in the view. How we need to increment, if someone can change it to 100 as well. So this is view. It should not be it should not have any logic. And you might say, what's the issue with re-rendering? Well, it's not an issue until there is an issue. So let's say instead of doing the minor thing like setting a property, you might be calling an API, right? So re-rendering matters there. And let's say there are multiple parent components, too much hierarchy, and because of that, if everything changes, then the component, instead of rendering linearly, it renders exponentially, and at that time we cannot pinpoint exact location of performance, because everything is an issue. We'll need to change everything, right? So re-rendering is definitely an issue. There is another way we can at least solve this issue. So let me show you that. So I create a different kind of double component. So see here, we are using use effect, and as soon as count changes, the double value changes. But here, instead of doing that, we are declaring the double as a constant, and every time we are counting. So if I show you that example, this and this are same, but this is rendered only 11 times. So what's happening here is, as soon as count changes, the double is calculated and the double is shown. So this calculation is done with every render, but at least it is not re-rendering the whole component. Now you need to weigh in the calculation, as in if this calculation is just simple calculation like this, the multiplication, it is cheap and you can afford to do that. But if this calculation is heavy, let's say if you're doing complex calculation, or if you're doing API calling, then don't do it. Then use effect. So always check that and use carefully. So let's improve this code, and let's do something every sane developer would do. Let's do the next best thing, which is React context. So what we do is we create a context using this default in React, right? We create initial context for count, double, we create a function to increment, and we create a provider. So here I've declared the count, double, and on change of count, I'm changing the double value as well, and declaring the increment function, and on increment I'm changing the count. So we need to create a provider and wrap this provider in my layout. In the next application it's a layout, but in normal React application it can be any parent component, right? The standard way to use this is we can use this use context in any of the component, use context, and provide the context, counter context, and it will give me these values, basically this object. But I don't like to do that, because in that sense I am letting my component know what state management mechanism I am using, right? I'm letting my count component know that I'm using React context. So instead of that, I like to do that inside my count provider itself and expose the count context. And I don't expose the count context here. So in that sense, the component doesn't have direct access to the context. So in this way, I can directly do use count context and get the count, and in the double I can get the double. In the increment I can get the increment function directly, and in the page I don't need to declare anything, and I don't need to do any prop drilling, right? This is definitely better. The logic is now inside the context, logic is separated, there is no prop drilling. And if you see this, let's try. So the parent component is now at least rendered only once, but there is an issue, right? Initially the count was increased only 10 times, but now it is 21 times. even the button is rendered 21 times. Why is that? Because in the context, when we increase count, we are having use effect right into the context, and it changes the double as well. So we are passing these values, right? So if any of one of these value changes, the all of the children and its children and everything, the whole tree is re-rendered, right? So doing this did not only solve the re-rendering issue, but it kind of increased the re-rendering issue. And also it can be too much boilerplatey, as in, let's say currently we have only one context, but we might have multiple contexts like user context, auth provider, something else. So this can be really tricky. And let's say if counter provider changes, all of its children will be re-rendered. So this becomes exponentially tough to manage. Right? There is a way to solve this issue actually. So instead of passing this, actually my IntelliJ suggests that, right? It changes with every render, and to fix this, we can use memo. So I'm not going to show that. The reason being, I don't like to use memo a lot, because if you do that, then it's like coding only for performance and not React way. As in, it is going to be non-React. And another thing is, we can use memo and use callback to solve this. But another thing is, it's way easier to forget about using use memo. And if you do that, then the whole purpose is lost. As in, if you don't have use memo and use callback in every time we are doing re-rendering, then even if he misses in one place, it re-renders everything again. It is possible that it won't re-render for every value, but at least let's say I have used use memo and use callback for all these providers, but I missed in count provider. So even in that case, if anything changes in count provider, everything else is anyways re-rendered. So it's way easy to forget about that, right? So let's look at third-party libraries. I divide all the third-party libraries in two ways. One is bidirectional, or I call it let's call it bidirectional, and one is unidirectional. So let's start with this. The most famous and kind of pioneer, at least in React, is Redux, right? Let's look at that, how the code looks like. So I might have, okay. For the Redux, we need to declare a store. So there is a slice. By the way, don't use Redux as it is. You need to use it using Redux query. It's a wrapper around Redux. It's officially provided. So you need to declare initial state. Then you need to declare the reducer. Reducers are functions, right? And then you can declare that incremented is a function, and it gets the value of state. And as soon as someone calls increment, in Redux word, we are calling this action, and you need to dispatch an action. So as soon as someone dispatches incremented action, the state of count changes by 1 and state of double changes by 2. This is standard boilerplate code, and this is what I was talking about. Either you can use the use selector directly in the component, but I like to avoid that, and I like to do it inside the store itself and expose only use count hook, right? So I need to wrap my provider. The benefit of Redux is the provider is only, the store is only one. There is only one global store. You don't need to do the too many stores, and the page looks exactly like context. The count looks exactly like context. You need to use count. Same way the double looks exactly like that. Increment is slightly different, as in you still need to use React Redux's use dispatch, and you need to dispatch the incremented action, right? So let's see how Redux works. This is way better, right? The parent component didn't change. This component rendered only many times as count. The double changed only 11 times, and the button didn't change at all. So this better, right? This is definitely better. The only issue is Redux is too much boilerplatey, and this is not easy to maintain. It is easy to maintain, but it's not easy to learn. And there is a better way. That is my personal opinion. It's called a library called Zustand. So it's almost the same. You still declare a store. You still declare the initial value. Still declare the function, and the function does almost the same thing, and you still exposes the use count, use increment values. The only difference is while the Redux uses the dispatch way, and you need to still let the component know that you are using React Redux, the Zustand actually exposes the function as well, right? So you can directly use increment in your increment function, and in that way the function doesn't need to know that it's a Zustand, right? And if I show the Zustand, it is going to perform the same thing. One render, and only 11 renders. So Redux is the default one. Too much boilerplate and not easy. The Zustand is easier but does the same thing. The way it increases the performance and it doesn't re-render is when you use the use count, instead of getting the whole state, it gets the only count property. Right? The same in Redux. It gets the count property. So in that sense, this will be re-rendered. So basically the count or double will be re-rendered only when the double property changes, nothing else. So that way it is easy, right? So in my way, the Zustand is better and unidirectional. I call it unidirectional because component cannot access the count property directly. As in, it is not accessible for update. It is still accessible to read, but it is not accessible for update. For the bidirectional, there are two libraries. One is called Recoil, and another is Jotai. Again, Recoil came up with this idea of atom, and it pioneered that, but it is not actively maintained as much as Jotai. So we are going to look at only Jotai. Fun fact: creator of Jotai and Zustand are same. So let's see how Jotai does that thing. So there is a in the Jotai, all you do is create an atom, and that's it. when you want to do count, you need to use atom, and you get, it's exactly like you doing use state. If I see here, I can see the set count method as well, right? So it's exactly like use state. The only difference is instead of doing use state in the component itself, you do it in a store method. So let's see how that works. That's bad, right? Why is that? Because you're not supposed to use the Jotai this way. There is a better way to do it, and not only better, that's the standard, that's the only way you can do it. So instead of exposing the count atom directly, you can expose the count value. So you create another atom and you get only count. So this count value, so I haven't exposed the count value atom at all. I have created a separate hook that does that, right? So instead of doing that, instead of getting use atom, I'm exposing the count value atom, and that way I am getting the value. Same for the double, exposing the double. Now this is where the Jotai is getting interesting. So there is another atom I'm creating. It's called double count atom, and what it does is it gets the count atom. Say this is a count atom, this is a count atom, and it multiplies by 2. So what it means is internally Jotai will create a dependency because I used get count here, and internally Jotai will create a dependency. Whenever the count will change, the double count will change. And let's say there is another atom, and if that another atom changes, if I don't use the get count in the double counts declaration, double count won't change, right? And same way, this is called read only atom, and this is called write only atom. So for the atom's first priority, I set null. So what it means is increment's value cannot be read. There is only write only atom. So by increment, what I do is I set count atom by getting count atom and incrementing it 1, and then I expose the use increment method, and I directly use it as a function, right? So let's see how that works, right? That is better. So there are, when I say this is bidirectional, what I mean is I can actually, sorry, this is wrong. I can actually go in increment and use the set count directly. So I have a way to increase it by 10 directly from component, right? So this has same issue as normal use state. If you are going to use it like this, then bidirectional is way worse than any other libraries. But, and in my opinion, this is prone to create mistakes as well, right? So unidirectional has a better way, as in update is restricted. Only the library provides you the way a function to manage the update, while in bidirectional you can update in any way. So this idea resonates with me, but since I am doing I'm not exposing the count atom directly and creating read only and write only atoms, and there is, and I'm not even exposing the atoms directly, right? I'm only exposing the use increment hook, and there is only one way to increment the count value, which is by this hook. So in that sense, even though this is bidirectional, uh, I'm doing update only using the function, right? So I'm able to achieve this principle in Jotai as well. Another thing that resonates with me on the Jotai is the way it is really separated. So in the increment method, I'm incrementing only count. While if you check the Redux and Justand, the increment actually increments the count and double both. Same with Justand, right? Issue with this is, if I want to, let's say, remove the double, so I'll need to remove it from here and here. But if I remove the double from Jotai, I just need to remove it from here. So in that sense, the code is really decoupled, and it has all the benefits of performance and all. There is a minor thing about Jotai's. Jotai gives many utilities, like it gives atom with storage. So what it does is, it creates a local storage in your browser, and if I increase this, let's say by 10, if I see the application local storage, see there is a count value, right? So that sense, it stores, and if I refresh, still the value is there. So nice to have. Nothing. Okay. Let's look at the next thing, which is server. So when Redux initially came, people were actually using it to call the APIs. Now the client state and server state are different. So let's say if you have user list and calling the user API, right? That's a totally separate thing. It's a server state. It's not a client state. So ideally, we should not mix both of them. And to show that, I have another thing. We'll create another application, which is, again, you might have not used ever. Let's create a to-do application. So here, I won't show too many examples here, because to me the choice is simple. We'll use a React query for that. So what you need to do is, you need to create a query client, and you need to create your hooks. So for getting to-dos, you need to create a function. You can either use Axios or fetch or anything. That's up to you. It is not actually API calling feature, but it's the state management of APIs, right? So you can in the query function, you can use that function and get it. Don't worry about these things. So the application is simple. I have a summary component and I have a to-do list component. So summary component gets all the to-dos, and the to-do list components again gets all the to-dos. And the nice thing about React queries, you can get the data, you can get the fields like is loading, is error, everything, and based on that you can render it conditionally, right? Here I am loading showing dot 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 when something is loading. Let me show it. See, right? So that's best. If you want to do it manually, then it will take a lot of time. Let me show you another good feature. So see, I'm using use to do here in the to-do list, and I'm doing it in the summary page as well. So in that sense, I'm actually calling it 2 times. But if I see the network tab, so let me refresh that. So say this, the to-do API is called only once, even though I'm subscribing it from the 2 places, right? So if you do it manually, you need to do a lot of things to make it happen. There are other things as well, like it gives you optimistic updates. So let me do a slow 3G. Okay, so look at here, what are the API calls I'm doing. So if I add another to do, see, the API call is just started, but still the element is here, and you see little update tag there. So even before the to do is entered there, basically the API call is done. You can actually get it in the UI here. So let me show it another. See, update here. So even it is doing the post, and the get has just started now, right? So this called optimistic updates. Good to have. If you do it manually, it is going to be tough, but using React query, it's way easier. And see here, the get is rendered only once. So if I do 4, so even though summary and the list uses the to-do list API, the get to-dos is called only once, right? So for the server state, there are a couple of options. Even Redux provides us Redux query, but I prefer React query. It's way better. And the caching and other features it provides, Redux query does not provide in easy way. And there is another library from Vercel as well. So Vercel provide okay, I forgot that, SWC or something. I forgot that. But there's the de facto standard. Now, when to use what? Whenever there is API, definitely use the server state. The client state, whenever you have something like this, you can use client state. A couple of example I can think about is theme or dark mode, right? Or let's say if you use Microsoft Office, you have a ribbon here, right? So whether you have ribbon expanded or hidden, if you have some configuration like this, you can use the client state. Now think about this. If you have that client state, let's say if you have that for dark mode, and you can turn dark mode on and off, and everything is changed. And you open another tab. So if you haven't persisted that, the dark mode is going to be shown as light mode in the new tab, and that's not a good experience, right? So in that sense, the Jotai is way easier to work with, right? So do that. You might think when to use normal React use state. So I would say if the state is only for that component, for example this, if I changing the value of new to do, the value is reflected only in this component. So if you're doing something like that, then use the use state. But as soon as you state is shown in something else, don't use use state. Use something like this. You might say, when should you use React context? I would say because of the re-rendering thing. Even if you want to use context, think about something like that, because if you use React context and the value changes too much, it is going to have an issue with re-rendering, right? And use context when something is not going to be changed, like auth state. As soon as you log in, you are logged in entire application, and the login information doesn't change a lot. But and as soon as you log out, you need to anyways re-render the whole application. So for the values where values don't change, using context is okay. But for anything the value changes frequently, like let's say there is a side menu, and the side menu is opened every time you click on a button. So use something like a Jotai. That will make your life easier. Now I have another opinion on that. So let's say you chose the default theme is light, and you choose the dark theme. You like the dark theme. Let's say after work I went to home, and at the night I opened the same website in another laptop, and I opened the same website, and since default mode is light, at the midnight where the room is dark, I'm blown with light mode, or the white light. I would have preferred if website opened in dark mode, because that's my default mode anyways, right? So what if instead of storing this context in client, you store that in server? Now I'm not saying you need to do that, but my point is minimize the use of client state and maximize the use of server state. That way it is going to be a great UX and better way to store. Imagine how much your user like the user experience. If the website is, you open the website from different laptop and still you are presented with dark mode, and all your configuration, like the way my ribbon should style, all other configuration is the same in one laptop and the same in other laptop, right? The conclusion: for the client, I prefer Jotai. For the server, prefer React query.